The bad light. It is said that the people who drive trucks or buses on the road have the best horror stories to tell. And you know what? It's true. I may not have been on top of any vehicle when this happened to me, but the fact that I was on foot, camping in the middle of nowhere, made it much worse because we had no way to escape. This happened to me in Argentina, the country where I was born. When I had not yet gone to try my luck in Europe, I lived in the rural part of the country. There we have different traditions and urban legends, but I always ignored them. I thought they were just stories that our parents told us to scare us. At that time, I was already a father, and I didn't really believe in any of that. My wife and I had recently separated. She was traveling in Europe, and so our son Al wouldn't fall behind in school. We decided to have him stay with me for a while. I knew that the adaptation was not going to be easy, so I tried to get us to do activities together. And when everything failed, the only thing left was what I liked to do the most: go for a run on the road. In the beginning, I held back, tried not to go too far from our house, and come back as soon as he got tired. But as my son gained more endurance and perseverance, he was also encouraged to run farther. Al was a 17-year-old teenager, so sooner or later he was going to catch up to my pace. This running thing was working out pretty well, so I decided to take it a step further. Aside from a few hours of road running, this time we would be camping. I'm aware that spending all night camping with the father should not be almost any teenager's favorite activity, but a lot of good things could come out of this. To my surprise, Al was not too unmotivated, had a great adventurous spirit, and had never camped before. On the other hand, we formed a good bond, so our relationship was in a surprisingly good spot. In the beginning, the camping went the way I would have wanted it to go. I'm not going to lie to you. We didn't go into the middle of the woods like you would in any normal situation. I can enjoy casual camping, but I was just a novice at this, and I wasn't interested in doing anything risky, so we stayed well placed, but a few meters from the road. We set up our tents, obviously separated. We got everything we needed to make a fire and sat down to eat while we caught up with our lives. Luckily for me, there was no signal there, so Al's attempts to distract himself with his cell phone were short-lived. We were both just about to go to sleep, finishing getting settled inside our tent, until something caught my attention. A strange and intense blue glow. Al was looking at it too, and he was just as confused as I was. Curiosity got the better of me and I approached. I had never seen such a glow. What could it be? It even had something hypnotic about it. As I walked slowly to its location, I could see how the light became brighter and brighter. At that moment, I was in such a trance-like state that I had forgotten that Al was behind me. My eyes burned just looking in that direction. It was like a small sun directly attacking my eyes, drawing me to it. As I reached the light's location, I encountered the source of that glow for the first time. It wasn't a person with a flashlight, and there was nothing or no one generating the light. It was just there, on its own, floating. I was going to keep getting closer, until almost by reflex, I turned around and saw Al, just as confused as I was, walking towards that light. A strange sense of alertness came over me, and I ran to my son, shaking him to get him to react. Once he did, we tried to run back to the road, but it was impossible. I felt very dizzy, and with every step I took, I stumbled or fell. My legs and body felt very weak, and each step I took to escape was harder than the last. I started to cry and felt the need to vomit, but I knew that the only thing I had to be thinking about at that moment was escaping with my son. During that period of panic, I remembered all the urban legends my parents and grandparents told me. I knew what was happening, but I refused to admit it. That bright, intense light had a name. That was the evil light. Do you know what else I knew about this legend? That no one who had seen it up close had survived to tell the tale. I fell once more to the ground, and as I looked ahead, that bright blue light was in front of me. It moved very slowly, but for every inch it advanced I felt worse, and it was even harder to escape. When it was in front of me, all I could do was scream in despair. Suddenly, I felt someone grabbing my shoulder, dragging me along. It was Al. The teenager pulled me far enough away to get some distance. With his help, I managed to stand up and run towards the road without falling. And when we finally arrived, another light approached us at high speed. Surrendering to what was coming, we both closed our eyes, not knowing what was about to happen to us. When I opened my eyes, I realized that the last light was a car, and it almost ran us over. A man got out of the car angrily, yelling at us, but I couldn't concentrate at all on what he was saying. Behind him, in the distance, I could see that light coming closer and closer. As soon as we saw it, Al ran as fast as he could. I wanted to warn him to get out of there, but there was no point. I felt I could only run with my son. The man forgot about us, and with a lot of curiosity, walked towards the light. The man walked through the huge orb of light, losing himself in the brightness. Once he'd finished walking, he had already disappeared, as if he had never been there. Meanwhile, I could only run to my house. I ran and ran until there was no sign of anything, not the car, not the man, not the light. We had escaped. The next day, everyone in town knew what had happened. I didn't even bother to go and pick up our belongings from the area where we made the campsite. Nothing there was worth our lives. The police went to the area and did not find the mysterious light, but they did find the car. That same day, the man driving the car was reported missing. The police questioned us to find out what had happened and were shocked that Al and I had the exact same story. Even though they told us they couldn't take a report from the bad light as official, they believed us. Everyone believed us. Our family, the police, and the whole town. This story may sound crazy, but if you live long enough in this area, you will believe me too. Nowadays, my wife and I conversated and fixed our problems in the marriage. I have a very good relationship with Al. He may be getting on with his adult life, but he visits us all the time. No matter how far apart we were at the time, he always knew that I was his father, and just as I love him, he loves me, and he would never let anything happen to me. Sometimes I see on the internet the news that happens in my old town, and I am noticing that the sightings of the evil light are becoming more and more frequent. The only thing that hasn't changed is the fact that no one who has seen it up close has survived long enough to tell the tale. I guess we are the only ones who have survived something so dangerous, and from what I see, that is not going to be changing anytime soon. Abandoned hospital. Have you ever done urban explorations? You see, I'm not a YouTuber. I'm not interested in generating content from this, and I don't even want to be famous. I just enjoy getting into places where other people wouldn't go. To tell you the truth, I never believed in the paranormal, and that's not what I was looking for in these explorations. And that's why I can tell you this story, as I spent months thinking I had gone crazy. It all started on a camping day. I had planned to do an exploration of the forest. Nothing out of the ordinary. I was just going to spend the night in the woods. None of my friends could go, but I had no problem with that. It wasn't my first exploration alone, and it wasn't going to be my last one either. Or so I thought. I spent the whole day going deep into the heart of the forest. I didn't really know what I would find, but I knew that there were no animals too dangerous or anything like that, since I always investigate where I go. When I got deep enough into the forest, I noticed that it was starting to get dark. So I made my camp and set up camp in a part that I saw as fairly open and free of trees. I ate quickly and went to sleep when it was still quite early. As the sun was rising before 6 a.m., I wanted to get up early and with lots of energy. I closed my eyes slowly, and before I knew it, I was asleep. When I opened my eyes, I felt something was wrong. I'm not a deep sleeper, but I can sleep through the night if no one wakes me up. And that night, something woke me up. The night seemed normal and quiet, but something was wrong. Call it a feeling, experience, or whatever, but I knew someone was there. Looking out at the pasture in front of me, I watched as something moved unnaturally. The wind wasn't blowing, and it didn't seem to be an animal. Someone was watching me. It's not the first time I've been in danger, but I've never encountered anything like this before. A stalker whose face or intentions I did not yet know was watching me. Faced with this discovery, I did the most logical thing I could think of. I grabbed my flashlight, a knife I had at my side, and went in the opposite direction to where the grass was moving. In that camp, I didn't have anything too expensive. I could go look for it the next day if there was anything left. In one swift move, I took off at high speed towards the pasture and started running as fast as I could. I didn't know exactly where we were, but I had a good idea of it. As I ran away, I could hear someone behind me chasing me, but the footsteps got lost little by little, until they ended up disappearing. I walked a little more looking for a place to hide, and that's when it hit me. In front of me was an abandoned building under construction. It was strange. For all the things outside, it looked like a hospital. But what was a hospital doing in the middle of nowhere? Why was it abandoned? Whatever the reason, it was a good hiding place from whoever was still walking near me. So I decided to go in and hide until I was sure this person wasn't following me anymore, or just that it would be daylight. Once inside, I realized that the place was fuller than they thought. Why would they leave a place like this half-built? I explored the abandoned hospital, trying to get as far into it as possible. I wasn't really afraid of what might be inside the hospital, but it was the man who was stalking me outside that really terrified me. Behind a closed double door there were lights. How was this possible? How did the energy get here? Why was it coming? Where was I? I admit that curiosity got the better of me, and I walked to the door. Once I opened it, I was met with a new surprise. Behind the closed door, there were no people. There were no guards, and they were not performing any experiments or anything I could expect. It was just a hallway with light. I walked a little inside this corridor, considering going into one of these doors to hide. If that person who was stalking me saw this place, he would surely think there were guards and would not want to enter. I walked with a big smile into my house, thinking that the worst had already happened and that surely this person could not do anything when something in front of me made me stop in my tracks and fall to the floor with fright. One of the doors to the lighted corridor was open. Behind that door, there was no light, just gloom. Normally, this would not be the striking thing. The whole hospital except that room was dark. What really surprised me was that behind that terrifying door, someone was peeking out. For a moment, I thought it might have been a guard. It could also be my stalker or a simple homeless person who was living in the hospital. But no, this was something much worse. I'll never forget how I felt when my eyes came face to face with whatever that was. It was a bald, wrinkled, almost blue head. Its eyes were huge and white, and as it looked at me, it had a smile from ear to ear that chilled my blood. I didn't know what this was, but this was not human, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen in my life. At that moment, the first thing you think of is to run. Run as fast as you can and leave it behind. Would you believe me if I told you that I didn't? In that situation, I was so scared that my body became totally paralyzed, falling to the floor in panic and possibly victim to whatever it was that was in front of me, looking at me very calmly. As if knowing that I could not move, that being came out of the door and walked slowly down the hallway towards me. His body was tall, gangly, and skeletal. His bones seemed to be disproportionate and senseless, but he still walked towards me without any problems. What struck me most was the way he walked. I'm still terrified thinking about it. This being, the steps of this being were irregular and difficult, as if it was suffering every step it took. It was strange. It was walking like any other person, but something about that walk seemed forced. It was as if that thing that was coming towards me was trying to walk, trying to be human, trying to make me think that I could be calm because I had another human in front of me. Seeing something so horrible filled my body with energy, and instead of using it to fight this being, I used it to run. I ran and ran and ran. I was so desperate that I didn't realize that I was still in an abandoned place. Since I entered, my life never stopped being in danger. Not by ghosts, psychopaths, or accusers, but by myself. As I was escaping from the being in that hallway, I fell down the escape hatches and ended up on the floor below. My body hurt a lot, and it was impossible for me to get up. But even so, I made every effort humanly possible to get out of that area, to keep going down the stairs and get out of there as soon as possible. But it was no use. Because of the blow I had had at that moment, it was impossible for me to keep my concentration enough to keep from fainting. And so, as I closed my eyes and saw something or someone crawling near me, my eyes were much heavier than before, and when I closed my eyes, I fainted. When I woke up, it was already daylight. My body hurt a lot, and I still had the wounds from falling off the ladder. I went back to check the area that was lit, but now not only was there no light coming from under the door, but the door was locked with chains. To tell the truth, it didn't bother me much either. Anyway, I had no plans to set foot in that area again. When I managed to escape, the first thing I did was to tell the police everything. Once I did, they all told me that what happened to me in this hospital was probably a lie, the result of my nerves being harassed. It could even be the development of a mental illness that made me hallucinate. Whatever it was, I was sure that what I saw there was real. What the police were able to discover was the information about the man who was following me. Apparently, he was an ex-convict who had escaped from prison. This man never planned to hurt me, but he surely would have if necessary. Luckily, the police caught him a few meters after he ran into me, as he just kept running in a straight line. I still wonder what happened that day. Honestly, the older I got, the blurrier the whole story became. Let this be a lesson to remember there are things beyond human understanding. Today, I'm afraid to go camping or to hospitals, and I know that no one can judge me for having it. The only thing I hope is that no other explorer ends up in that scary abandoned hospital again. Maybe I survived by being lucky, but who knows what that thing might do to the next person who walks in. Deep web. Everyone tells me that I should never get involved with the deep web. They tell me that it is a very dark place and that only bad things can come from it. Some people have even blamed me for the story I'm about to tell them, as if I had anything to do with what happened. To those people, I always say the same thing. Do you know the worst thing about the deep web? Even if you don't do anything about it, even if you don't even know it exists, you can get entangled in it. You can be its victim. And that is exactly what happened to me. I will tell you how it all happened. My story begins on a field trip with my buddies. We were all scouts, and although we were an adult troop, we were only 18-year-old boys accompanied by an instructor. That day we were just going to untie knots, make a campfire, and tell ghost stories. And that's exactly how the day started. We set up our tents around a circle where we were going to eat marshmallows later in the evening. Some of us were in charge of looking for wood, others had to go exploring, and one of us, usually the most experienced, would guide us with a map. Our camp was in a remote location, far from civilization and any kind of cell phone signal. This meant we were completely isolated, which sounded exciting at the time, but soon became our worst nightmare. The campsite was near a small stream, surrounded by tall trees that blocked the view of the starry sky. We pitched our tents. When we all returned from our chores, we got down to work and began to prepare everything for the night. A few hours later, we had all the tents ready and a fire going, so we started cooking our rations. The night went on like any other camping trip, with laughter and jokes among friends. However, as the darkness closed in on us, we began to feel a strange uneasiness in the air. That's when we heard the sound of rustling branches in the distance. We all became alert, thinking it was a wild animal. The instructor said to wait and went to investigate. We all listened, and within seconds, someone was coming from his direction. But what emerged from the trees was not the instructor. Several men dressed in black, wearing masks that hid their faces, appeared out of nowhere. One of them held a camera, while the other carried some kind of rusty axe. The rest were carrying guns, and they were pointing them at us. We were paralyzed with fear and surprise. The intruders slowly approached us, staring at us through their masks. One of them spoke in a voice that sounded distorted and mechanical. They ordered us to get up and walk toward the stream. With no other choice, we obeyed, feeling like we were trapped in a never-ending nightmare. As we walked toward the creek, the intruders made us form a circle. They stared at us, their eyes hidden behind masks. Then, the man with the axe began to speak in a voice that chilled our blood. He explained that we were part of a macabre live show being broadcast on the deep web. We had been randomly chosen to be the victims of his twisted fun. Our hearts were pounding, and anxiety gripped us. The man with the camera began to record us, pausing at each of our faces. We knew we were being filmed for an unknown audience in some dark corner of the web. Tears began to gather in our eyes, but we knew that crying would only make our situation worse. The deep web psychopath explained to us the rules of the macabre game we were about to play. Only one of us would make it out of that night alive, and the rest would disappear into the depths of the forest. The man placed a bottle in the middle of the ground and began to spin it to determine who would be the first to die. The bottle finished spinning and pointed to one of my friends. The intruders grabbed him and dragged him into the dark forest. I still remember my friend's screams. He was desperately calling for help, shouting that if we all got together, we could attack the men. Otherwise, we were all going to end up dying. You know, I still think about his words a lot. To tell you the truth, he was right. If we had listened to him, most of what happened that night could have been prevented. But can you blame us for not acting? We were only 18 years old. We had never had any real problems in our lives, and suddenly we were facing men from the deep web who wanted to play with us, torture us, and kill us. We could do nothing to stop them. We could only hear our friends' screams of terror fading in the distance. I admit that we all stared at each other. Some were thinking of attacking them. Others wanted to escape. But in reality, we were all frozen with fear. We were all convinced that there would surely be more people in the woods watching us, waiting for one of us to attack or try to escape. Hesitantly, we continued to listen to the sounds of our friends wailing, which would haunt us for the rest of the night. Meanwhile, the man with the axe looked at the rest of us and said that only one would escape. The rest would suffer the same fate. Time passed slowly and panic set in. We didn't know whether to try to flee or stay and wait for our turn to come. Finally, another bottle throw pointed to another of my friends. They led him into the woods, and this time we heard no screams, just an eerie silence that left us even more terrified. As the night progressed, the intruders continued to pick off our friends one by one. Each time one of them disappeared, a sense of helplessness and despair grew in me. I knew that the probability of being next was increasing, and my fear became unbearable. At one point in the night, none of us thought about escaping. The idea of being the last one alive started to become more and more attractive to all of us who were left. It was going to be harder and harder to resist or escape. We could only play by their rules. Without realizing it, we all became a herd of frightened sheep waiting to be slaughtered. Finally, there were only two of us left, my best friend Mark and me. The man with the axe looked at us with a sinister smile and informed us that it was now our turn to play. He gave us a choice. We could fight each other to the death, and the survivor would be freed, or we could refuse and face an even worse fate. Mark and I looked at each other with terror in our eyes, knowing we had no choice. The fight was brutal and heartbreaking. We were not killers, we were friends. But the life at stake forced us to fight until one of us lay motionless on the ground. Blood mixed with mud, and the sound of our blows echoed in the night. Neither of us was really fighting. We were just two teenagers punching each other and crying. Every punch I hit Mark was like hitting myself, and I could see in his eyes that the same thing was happening to him. You know, I've known Mark my whole life. He was the first guy I talked to on my first day of high school. And since then, we've always been inseparable friends. Mark was like a brother. A brother I was trying to beat to save my own life. If either of us had really wanted to take the other one down, we could have done it very easily. But all our blows were like content. We both wanted to survive, but neither of us could bring ourselves to drop everything. And the Axeman knew it. I could see in his face how he was getting impatient, and when the man with the camera spoke to him, he only got angrier. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see how the Axeman grimaced and prepared to come at us. I knew what this meant. The fight was boring him. In that moment of desperation, I stopped thinking about Mark and thought about my parents. I thought about how devastated they would be if anything happened to me. I thought about my father, who would blame himself for my death since he insisted that I come. At that moment, I closed my eyes and hit Mark as hard as I could, while crying and closing my eyes. Mark was instantly defeated, and the man with the axe was surprised but began to laugh. The man with the axe came up to me and congratulated me for surviving. He told me I could leave. The man not only told me that I could tell the story, but he threatened that if I didn't tell the story, terrible things would happen to me and my family. So I was left to go, alone and traumatized, in the middle of the dark forest. I ran without looking back, aimlessly, until I finally found a path that led me back to civilization. I arrived at a police station and told them what had happened. However, the police could find no trace of the deep web psychopaths or my missing friends. The deep web is a dark and mysterious place, difficult to trace. You know, sometimes I feel like I have to do something, like look for them, and get revenge for what happened to Mark. But inside I know they are just fantasies. I have no choice but to live like a coward whose family is alive, and plans to keep them that way.